Hello everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. My husband and I are combining talks and cycling, so we've got a good bit of both in. I wish today was a cycling day with this weather. We did have a couple of rain days, so it's a pleasure though to be here. And I will mention that Bartram Trees is a partial sponsor of my travel, hosting me, and take a look at their stock. Wonderful material. The Big Barn Conference was last week, and that was quite fun. We've heard a good bit this morning about how to more effectively introduce trees into built environments, into hardscapes, into cities, into communities. And I started out in that world. I started out as a biologist, then did a brief stint as a landscape architect, thinking that would be my professional ambition. And then I took courses in environmental psychology, and it clicked. This is where I found the blend between people and nature, people and environment, people and ecology. And so what I'd like to do today is just to share a little bit, a slice of some of the research that my colleagues and I have done over the years. Students, other scientists, and people in professional groups in local government, because doing social science, it's absolutely necessary that I collaborate with people such as yourselves that are leaders in your community, you're leaders in your organizations, and that's what helps make social science happen. We've heard a little bit this morning about iTree Eco, and there are a number of different iTree analysis tools. And I work part-time for the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, with a research station, so I'm almost obligated to talk about iTree. And that tool enables us, by looking at the entire canopy, the tree canopy across the city, to understand a range of benefits and values. And what we do then, or we, meaning you in your communities, perhaps hiring or engaging volunteers to help collect data, you first understand the structure of the forest. You understand the tree distribution, species distribution, age, and various other components or descriptors of that forest. From that, then, you can begin to understand the function of the forest. Water quality, stormwater management, air quality, energy savings, as well as more tools and more benefits and functions that are coming online with these with the iTree suite. Some of these tools, then, you turn the crank one more step and you learn about value. What are the dollar or pound benefits associated with some of those functions and the structure? And finally, once you know all of this, or once a community understands all of this, you can make much better management decisions, and you can potentially engage other people who often, this is what I encounter as a social scientist. Why are trees good in the city? They're pretty. I love how trees look. They're so pretty. What these tools do is to help us to communicate that trees are essential in our communities. Yes, amenity is great. Yes, aesthetics make quality of life or enable quality of life. But these tools and these values help us to express the essentialness and how profoundly important it is to have trees in our communities. So we learn about stormwater, reducing stormwater runoff, and there are speakers from around the world, and probably in this country, your cities, who can speak at length about this. Likewise, air quality, the combination of particulates settling in the canopy on the surfaces of the leaves and bark, as well as metabolic processes that exchange gases and various polluting materials. But I want to, as a social scientist now, get personal, because we have done in Seattle an iTree analysis. And I find that we then talk about trees at such a high level that many people don't connect that to that. Some elected officials do. Some of the technicians in our communities do. But there are a lot of people who have political clout in our communities who don't necessarily connect at that rather abstract sort of level. So before I get to the main event of talking about trees and retail communities and consumer habitat, there was mention about health. And we are finding in the United States that the evidence about trees and urban nature more generally, gardens, parks, open spaces, trails, connections to health are how we're engaging more and more people who really don't know a lot about trees, but they're seeing the connection to green and they're starting to come on board. The World Health Organization has defined health in a very comprehensive way. It's not merely the absence of disease, but it's quality of life. And it's having the capacity for resilience. It's having the features in our environment that enable us to be at our best as well as not being ill. And here's one way of looking at that. So often, in some instances, talking to medical people or public health people, they often focus on epidemiology, and that is individuals, age, gender, hereditary factors, and then they may move into the next band of lifestyle factors. Do you smoke cigarettes? What are your eating habits? Do you have a sedentary lifestyle, or do you get up and move about in a routine way? So often health officials focus on these things, but we, as part of this green community, know that that outer band is very important. Creating quality environments, and that's where trees, the urban forest, parks, gardens, open spaces, that's how they connect to these essential health elements or health consequences in our cities. So to share some of this information, and again, a little sidetrack here, but we have now over 40 years of research about this connection between nature and health and human wellness. And some of that research has been done here in the UK, some in the US, some in Australia, some in Japan, more and more of it coming along from China. And what we see then is by way of experience of green, there are opportunities for health promotion and disease prevention, and it's fairly direct, and it happens fairly quickly. So some of the classic studies that were done by Roger Ulrich, who is an environmental psychologist in the US, now working in Sweden, early on, mid-1980s, he did studies, laboratory studies about stress response. And in a matter of about 5, 7, 8 minutes after people are stressed and have a view of green, this is not walking, this is simply seeing trees in green, stress response is reduced, and much more effectively than if you're looking at a built environment, if you're looking at all buildings or constructed materials. So that's kind of one of the kernels. We're now seeing cognitive function by way of looking at green, having green surroundings in our workplaces and in our schools and in around our schools. We're seeing improved cognitive performance, better performance on tests, graduation rates, things like that. So I can only scratch the surface of this. People sometimes invite me to talk about this, and I can go on for hours. And I've taken now, maybe 10 minutes of my allotted time to sort of open up and help you see this portal to health as an opportunity. There is so much of this research that where I used to speak about this as study bullet points, Roger Ulrich, hospital healing, Coe and Sullivan, reduced domestic violence in housing, Wolf, retail, improved sales. Now I can actually start to tell stories around subsets of this research. And one of the stories that I set up in some presentations is life course, life cycle, from cradle to grave. We now have studies that demonstrate health benefits. And as I look across the room, it looks like we are mostly, here, maybe tending over here. But even at the youngest ages, having nature, contact with nature is quite important. And two quick studies. A colleague of mine with the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, Jeff Donovan, looked at proximity of trees, proximity of canopy, and then county, local government birth rates, and found a relationship between tree canopy and healthy birth weight. Remarkable Really. These studies, or this study has now, it's not been replicated, but similar studies have been done now in Madrid, Vancouver, British Columbia, Los Angeles, and there's one other, and I don't recall exactly where it was. But with similar outcomes. Nature, birth weights, birth conditions, birth health, a little better. Across a population, not by individual, but across an urban population. Go to the other end of that life spectrum, and we see now more and more studies coming about regarding cognitive health for people who are older. Alzheimer's, dementia, other cognitive disorders are becoming ever more prominent in older people. And so within facilities and in and around neighborhoods, there are studies that are exploring the relationship between wander gardens, horticulture therapy, the presence of green, and various outcomes. So in this case, looking at a facility where people who have been diagnosed with dementia are residents, and finding a reduction in the amount of medications that are taken, also finding fewer falls. And this is so important because when we're older, bones are brittle. When we fall, that is often the gateway to ever more serious injury or serious disease. So this can be quite important for people, again, not on an individual basis, but across a population, across a city, across a nation. Where do you find this information? Where do you find this evidence? A number of people, my students, colleagues, even biophysical scientists, scientists who are working with biochar, working with biodiversity, have become interested in this. So students and I, with support from the U.S. Forest Service, have created this website, Green Cities Good Health. What we've done is to assemble these articles. In fact, this morning I was at the back of the room and pulled down another 20 of these. The pace of publication is remarkable now. In the 90s, it's like a hockey stick. So it started out, kind of dipped down, and now the pace is, it's really, so many nations, so many people, and we're just tapping English language journals. It may be even greater in other nations or other journals, particularly China. I think there's a lot of activity. So what we've done, we have over 3,000 peer-reviewed articles and a number of technical reports. We've taken those, we've sorted them into a series of topics, about a dozen topics, ranging from those topics that pertain to individuals. So life cycle and gender, there's a little bit of difference across studies in how women and men, boys and girls respond to nature. Work and learning, and then ranging up to a larger scale of community, entire community, local economics, place attachment, that larger sense of connection that a neighborhood or a community, a group of people will have to place. So for each of these you will find first an introduction, very quick introduction, the bullet points, if you wish to use those for newsletters or sharing in brief communications with decision makers, and then finally below a longer narrative, a longer description of the research, continues, all of it fully cited. So if someone you might share some of this and they might ask, well, really, what was the study? Are you kidding? All of the citations are there if you wish to share that, or look up the original research yourself. But based on my students' experience, you're not going to read many of the original articles. They're snoozers. Some of them are real snoozers, and ever more sophisticated in terms of research method. Some of them are coming out in medical journals, and it takes some time to wade through those things and read them because of the jargon, because of the language that's being used. So here you are. Here is a portal, not my work alone, but a community of science from around the world that are exploring this essential biophilic connection between people and nature and health. All right, now on to the topic I was invited to speak about. This is a series of studies that we actually finished some time ago, but I find that every once in a while there's a cycle of revival of interest. And we wanted to learn more about how consumers, how shoppers respond to trees in business districts. I want to make clear that as I start here, I will be describing response to canopy, to a full district investment in trees, not business by business. And I've had occasionally journalists, some business owners ask, well, my individual business, if I put planters or trees or whatever, can I expect benefit? Possibly, but I don't know from a research perspective. Our studies have evaluated entire districts, again, with that investment of trees over time, often over decades. And again, back of the room, looking through the internet, I found this quite interesting. Just yesterday, this was posted in the Star, a community, Sheffield, that it appears to me these are not earth muffin tree huggers. These are prominent people in the community, and they're concerned about removal of trees. And I read through the article, and it was because 3 people bumped their toes on the sidewalk tree roots in 2 years. And for that reason, there was an analysis done, and it was decided we're going to remove a whole bunch of trees. These people are objecting to that. And so maybe you are in that situation, you have colleagues, friends, concerned citizens. How might they build the case? In addition to, we like the trees, they're pretty, how do you build the case to retain trees, to look at alternatives, to look at infrastructure improvements that don't necessarily include removal of the trees? So, Green Cities Good Health is one opportunity. Within the business district, you might then want to look at some of this work that we've done. And these people in Sheffield recognize the awesomeness of trees. I've heard the word that you use for exceptional things in the UK, brilliant. That's brilliant. In the US, it's awesome. It's really awesome. And so people, they recognize the awesomeness of trees, but that's not necessarily shared by merchants and by people in business districts. So our study was then to look at some very basic research questions. Visual quality, of course, they're pretty. Or do people agree that they're pretty? Consumer behavior. Might there be any associations between the presence or absence of trees and the shopping behavior of people? And finally, what about product pricing? What about what they're willing to pay? These studies, again, multiple studies, they were done over about 10 years' time. Large cities across the US, over 250,000 population. We did one case study, Athens, Georgia, 100,000 population, and then a number of cities across the US, much smaller, 10 to 20,000 population. Our methods, we use largely surveys. Surveys went out online in some of these. Surveys were mailed and returned in some of these. Surveys were given to people as intercepts on the street, having teams of students randomize across a place and contact a variety of people and ask them similar questions. So what I'm going to do now is to summarize across multiple studies the highlights, the patterns of what we learned. First of all, we would include a number of images and people would rate them very simply, 1 to 5. How much do you like the image? Using a statistical approach called factor analysis, you look for the pattern across all of these ratings, across all of the people, and here's what we found. Largely pocket parks, small little places, nature spaces within the business district appear to be appreciated. And it makes sense. This is a place where maybe you can stop and sit for a bit, enjoy a coffee. If there's a shop nearby, maybe you have a small child with you, a little time for them to walk about away from the sidewalk and the traffic. Then full canopy. When we looked primarily at vegetation, we found the highest ratings were expressed for full canopy. Within these images, as the trees were smaller or more widely spaced, the ratings were reduced, were less. And here you see an example of that. And then finally, those images having no trees at all had by far the lowest ratings. And again, small towns, big cities, It was, the numbers changed a little bit, but this pattern, this hierarchy of response was fairly consistent. And at the same time, we did interviews with some merchants, about 30 merchants in different places. And some of them insisted, not by this image alone, but they insisted this was the sort of place they thought was good for shoppers, because the shoppers could whiz by and see their signs and see their storefronts and see their product, but look at that image. How many people are there? Is this the place that we want in our cities? Is this the place that represents our business community? Based on the research that we've done, I think the answer is no. No, we need more green there. We need more connection to the green environment. And what we've learned this morning is there are a number of ways to effectively introduce trees into this environment. Again, quick summary. So across the studies we found place perceptions. They of course said place character, amenity, beauty. What we found interesting is they tended to associate green places, forested places, with merchants that were more knowledgeable and more helpful. So we are social creatures and we make inferences. When I walked up here, probably you were thinking, oh, you know, she's this kind of person, or she might enjoy doing those sorts of activities, or where's she from? We are constantly processing information. We are not neutral processors. We make judgments, and then we gather more information and confirm or suspend those judgments. So there are inferences being made about that business community based on the character of the vegetation and based on the presence of canopy. People also told us that going to the green place, they'd be willing to spend more time. They'd be willing to travel greater distance to get there, and that they were willing to pay a little bit more for parking once they were there. But one thing we did find is that there was a peak on the visitation level up to about 2 hours, and then they would leave. So maybe in this sort of business district we're looking at about 2 hours of occupancy, of people spending time. And then finally, product pricing. So all of this is going on. Are they spending more? And that's kind of difficult to tease out. We used a technique that economists use called contingent valuation method. And what one does is asks very reasonable questions of people about what they would assume they would spend on something. And these sorts of studies are used for anything from pollution abatement. You know, a polluter dumps something in the water. What are you willing to pay to have that water cleaned up? But in this case, we applied it to retail districts and people looking at a long list of goods and services within these areas or within these places. They told us they'd be willing to spend 9 to 12% more. Taking this to other retail situations, one was strip malls, as they're called in the US. What would you call them here? Drive-by, small retail shops, single level. Anyway, you get the idea. Strip malls, they're often have incubator businesses, independent people who are just sort of getting started in businesses, or small franchise shops. And often, too often in the US, this is how they're treated in terms of landscape. Again, not necessarily what the local community would like to have as an expression of their identity and who they are as a place. So we use computer simulation, imagery, editing to change up the landscape in controlled ways on a series of identical images. And once again we found picture preference. We found that people are far more willing to spend more, travel greater distance, patronage behavior and all that, to these places having more plants at the road edge, trees, shrubs, and other plant materials. Another, you know, I have to say, we milked this idea because it kept getting funding. It was wonderful. As a research scientist, you're always, always the nose, trying to find money. And people were interested in this work, so we were able to continue with several different iterations of the project. In this one, the focus was high-speed roadways, expressways, freeways. And what we did was to evaluate, again, this is an identical image, computer simulation change, place without trees, place with trees, and then there were several ground level images as well. And we asked people about their interest in visiting a community as they're driving by. And you're seeing the pattern here. You know the answer. They told us they'd be far more willing to stop at this community, to stay at a hotel, to get a meal, to explore the community. There's something about a green gateway that suggests, hey, you're welcome here, come on in. We have a business district to share with you. So here again, quick summary. By the way, all of these slides I will have up on the internet within a couple of days. I tried to put it up. Again, I was in the back of the room. I was very busy this morning, and I tried to put this up in the firewalls or something, so I was not able to load this. But within a couple of days, if you would like to use these slides or review them, look at them again, this material will be available. So why would people respond in this way? And that's something that's really important as in the world of social science and nature, is we know about better stress response, we know about better cognitive performance, we know about other reactions to nature. You have green and there's some sort of outcome. We don't know the linkages yet. We don't quite know why these reactions happen. Is it endocrine, so cortisol? And stress response? Is it neuroscience, other things that are happening? And people are exploring these questions now in some of the more elaborate research that's happening. So here's my conjecture about why people would respond to green in a business district. And there are a number of studies in the world of marketing science that have looked at atmospherics. And within that world of retail research, atmospherics is this idea that you create an ambiance within the store and people respond to it in their purchasing behavior. One example, music. I read a study, depending on the nationality of the music that was played within a grocery store, there were greater levels of wine purchases. German music, more German wine. French music, more French wine. I mean, you know, this is surprising. It's subconscious sort of response. Color, you wouldn't be surprised. Color has an influence. Not surprising, friendliness and behavior of associates, those people who help you in a shop, you'll buy more with certain traits or certain behaviors that they offer you. Anthropologist who broke from academia and set up a consulting firm in New York City has helped us understand a lot of this. So if you want to find out how to avoid all these teasers that get you to part with more of your money, maybe you'd like to look at this book, The Science of Shopping. But for me, and doing this work, why can't we, as the urban forest or city tree community, introduce atmospherics into the curb zone, into the retail district, and help those merchants, assist those merchants with welcoming more people, earn a little more money, and maybe they'll part with a little bit of that to help grow and manage trees. So the curb appeal, why wait until someone enters your shop to welcome merchants and to provide the amenities that might encourage them to buy? Why not start out at the curb? Why not create a beautiful streetscape? Here's another aspect that I think plays out, and when one reads the early retail literature, we see that economists thought we were highly rational beings, that we would decide, I need to buy, or I want to buy this. Yes, I'll do some homework, I'll find out prices and characteristics, I'll go buy it, done, I'm happy. Well, we now know that particularly in these times, retail behavior is far more complicated than that. So creating an experience is very important. Also, enabling relationships. So many of us, not all, but many of us will shop with loved ones, friends. We enjoy going to a place and people watching. Again, we're very social persons, very social critters. And so opportunity to create experience, novel experience, to create relationship or to enable relationship in spaces, I think is part of the urban forest equation. All right, so I will now share a few case studies, see how this is expressed, because it's more than placing trees every 10 meters in the sidewalk within a business district. Because plants, those of you who are designers and planners, you well know, plants can help create community identity. The choice of plant material, the texture, the color, seasonality. One can create a place that says we're different from, you know, place B down the road and we think we're better. Come on over and spend time here. Alpha is a place where I've done a couple of sabbaticals in Japan, which I really enjoy. And on a student's recommendation, I traveled to this one retail center in Osaka. So traveled there, came up out of the subway, look in one direction. This is the retail area, not unusual in Japanese cities. It's a jumble of shops, services, people, all sorts of things going on. Turn around 180 degrees, and I'm looking at this place. And as you glance at that big structure, here's the entry. I've moved in maybe another 50 yards, 50 meters, and here's this kiosk. And in the next image, that kiosk is located here. All right, so you see the scale of this place. This is a regeneration. It's an old baseball stadium. So I forget the baseball team name, but they decided they needed a new stadium. Record number of people attending games. So made the investment in a new stadium about 2 miles away from this. But rather than tearing this down, they converted it then. People got together and in a very clever way converted it to a retail complex. So one enters from the street level here. There's a large apartment building located here, so some of the higher level gardens are dedicated for resident use. At the very top tier are some of the best restaurants in the city, very popular. But look at the cascade of vegetation through that space. Some of it is very ornamental horticulture, some of it is more native plant materials, more naturalistic. There's just a really nice variety of experiences within that complex space. When one continues on the ground level, I don't know how many of you have traveled in the ribbon canyons of the US, Utah. Some of you are nodding your heads. There are these deep river canyons eroded by rivers from sandstone over many, many years. And the architect, I think, that designed this, it's a firm in Los Angeles, and I have a feeling that Ribbon Canyon was in their mind. And you'll see vegetation, so there are places where there are planters, there are misters to keep this space. I think you were talking about transpiration of trees, so they've introduced mechanized transpiration to cool the space and to keep it more comfortable. As one moves up along through this space, a variety of experiences, outdoor cafes, places just for casual seating, all highlighted by vegetation. Some of it very small nooks, places where one can rest for a bit. This seemed to be quite popular with workers for visits, breaks, few people napping, parents with young children in this space. And so this for me really, you know, I'd been doing this research and it really elevated for me the possibilities of this retail nature connection. And it's a big vision, and maybe we're not able to have this sort of vision in all of our communities. Maybe we don't have this opportunity, but I think there are smaller scale expressions that can happen anywhere. The lessons learned from this space. It's a very large facility, but within it are a number of smaller rooms and social spaces. So think about the articulation and the subspaces within. Think about variety within unity. That was one of my main takeaways as a landscape architecture student. There is unity, a sense of unity as one moves through that space, but there's enough variety so that it's not boring. It's not the same plant palette, mood, character of space all through this. There's enough there to continue drawing one in, and then at each plateau where one is exploring, oh my gosh, look, you can go in and buy something there, and there, and there, and there. So there's a lot happening here. All right, more down to earth. This is my home community, Winslow. I live on a small island outside of Seattle called Bainbridge Island. Went for a walk one day, took some pictures looking for these similar design expressions at a very, very modest scale. And what I enjoy here is that these benches, rather than all of them being set end to end, where it's very difficult to carry on conversation with people, merely rotating them around and creating a series of social spaces, a series of outdoor rooms that are defined in part by vegetation, by trees, as well as the structure. And thinking about adjacency to buildings, again, I find street furniture, plop, 10 meters, plop, 10 meters, plop. Here, this is located and concentrated around a bakery. And there are other than design expressions and seating located near other businesses. Just a few yards down the street, here's another business complex. So often, at least in the United States, you can see where the parking is. You park, you dash across the concrete, enter the shop or shops, purchase goods, and then dash back to the car. But here you're tempted to linger. You're tempted to stay in this space for a bit more time. Again, creating subspaces using vegetation, creating a sense of ceiling and walls and channels through this with the vegetation, and a place where people are welcome to talk, spend more time, and maybe decide, hey, you know, I forgot, I need something else. I think I'll go back into that shop. Last example, Texas, much drier climate than Scotland, as well as Seattle. But here, I really enjoyed, South Congress Avenue is a regeneration business district, regenerating, and they have these wonderful, beautiful live oak trees on adjacent private property. The boughs then extend out over the street, and so there is borrowed nature here. There's a saying in Japan about borrowed scenery, because the spaces are so compact in Japan, the designers always look for the vista beyond and how to draw that in to a smaller space where one is walking or seated. So they used the borrowed trees and then created this streetscape landscape. And it's very distinctive. One walks along through the South Congress area and you know when you've arrived and you know when you've left because of this landscape treatment. Fairly low cost, not very extravagant materials, but it's certainly a visual expression that welcomes people and says, hey, we care, you know, we want you here, come enjoy our place and spend a little money perhaps. Also offering a sense of identity and a message of renewal. So during our surveys and interviews with shoppers, they told us, oh yeah, when I go to a place and I see new landscape and new trees, it's telling me that something's changing there, and maybe it's worth going back and checking things out and seeing what they're doing with the shops. So trees are placemakers, and I work with, most of my colleagues are more traditional foresters, wildland foresters. And so many of the students that I work with, they straddle this wildland forest to urban forest outlook. And we see structure in the native forest. We see not just trees, not just canopy, but the understory vegetation, the richness that helps us to achieve greater health, mental health, physical health. And I think we can do the same. We can think about the structure and performance of our tree environments, our urban forest environments. Are they quiet places for healing and contemplation? And what is the appropriate vegetation there? Are they arterials? Are they places where the mobility of cars is essential, as well as we've heard, other means of mobility, pedestrians, cyclists, buses, and whatnot? And what is the expression there? And then what are those places where you really want to encourage pedestrians to get out of the car, roam about, and enjoy the district? So thinking about the variability of structure and placemaking, not unlike the native forest. Quick summary, urban forests, trees and cities, not just beautiful, it's human habitat, quality of life. We know that now from the trees, parks, gardens, nature and health literature, and that can be expressed as well within our business districts. We see positive associations with perception, preference, behavior, and from that then maybe we can be more creative in thinking about messaging and identity using vegetation in that retail district. And finally, customer relationships. How to connect with people by way of that visual environment, by way of that structural environment. Someone spoke earlier, a couple people have spoken earlier about how do we engage others than tree people. And I've had feedback from across the US that this sort of research has been one way to reach out to local officials, one way to reach out to urban planners. Also, business people, even though a business district is a very small locale within a city, business people are often very influential in a community. So the Chamber of Commerce, Rotary, I don't know what the equivalent organizations are here in the UK, but perhaps those people, even though they don't have dominion, if you will, over many trees, their opinions and attitudes often count within a community. The other, when I start at the beginning with health, I think there's another incredible opportunity for engagement, and here's an example. There is now a physician, a doctor in Washington, D.C. Someone comes in and they're a bit overweight, and so he looks at their health records and he starts with, okay, diet, let's try different eating habits. We're not going to go to meds yet. What we're going to do is I'm going to prescribe that you go for a walk in the park so many times a week for such and such a length of time. He's literally prescribing Park's prescription and including that in their medical records. This is a practice that's now, I understand it's happening in Albuquerque, New Mexico, San Francisco, as well as other cities. That a doctor, that medical professionals are looking at nature as a health prescription, as a health element. I think that that is one opportunity or one example of how we engage people who don't know a lot about biochar and may not know a lot about tree roots, but can start to see the consequences of making those investments. So I'll leave it at that. If you would like more information about the trees and business district work, if you go to Nature Within on the internet, you will find then the peer-reviewed studies, some fact sheets, different articles and things. Then, if you wish to look at this particular presentation, again, within a day or two, if you go to this link that says what's new, the slides will be available as a PDF there in a short time. So I think that's it. Thank you.